Thank you for being here, and I especially want to express my heartfelt gratitude to Carrie for inviting me to do this, for the pleasure of being in dialogue with you over years. I'm indebted to you in so many ways, and most grateful. Thank you. The title of the text is Scenes of the Flesh, Thinking, Feeling Carrie Mae Weems' Kitchen Table series, 25 years on. I'll be reading excerpts of the text. I won't be reading it in its entirety. It matters how we arrive at conceptual artist Carrie Mae Weems' Kitchen Table series, 1990. We redirect our attention to the work as a measure of capturing a world that, in our initial beholding, we understand as perhaps other than our own. The sense is heightened by the fact that Weems's correlated black and white photographs and text panels have often been described as having strong autobiographical dimensions. While this may be the case, any emphasis on the work's relation to Weems's personal life only functions to alleviate the conceptual pressure so capably and subtly activated by the artist. Glancing back over the course of 25 years, we can see how the formal and material choices made by Weems that put acute pressure on oft-linked descriptors of creative expression, such as art and life, or alternatively, art and politics, especially when commenting on the work of an artist of color, necessitate a more complex elucidation of her art. This curious tendency to reduce the conceptual complexity of her works also veils them in a shroud of overdetermined desire for authenticity, fact, and tradition, or remarks a psychological inflection. This ultimately does a disservice to our ability to truly comprehend its originality. To get there, I want to linger with strategies Weems deploys, namely the figure of the table, a return to the flesh, and the function of allegory, in order to articulate the work's conceptual parameters through the ways in which historical conditions, material choices, formal devices, and aspects of being intersect and are expressed. The Kitchen Table series is a photographic tableau of 20 silver gelatin prints and 14 text panels. Taken together, they feel like cinematic captures presented as thought images that are so expressive they exceed the bounds of their forms. In order to fully contemplate them, we need to engage in a polygenre reading that allows us to interpret events as opposed to objects, while nevertheless reflecting on the condition of objecthood that was the historical position of black being in the United States. With Weems present as the principal character, more precisely as a proxy in this performance for the camera, the eventfulness we feel encountering the work comes from the fact that the photographs and text are planes of information, not dependent on merely the optic. Rather, they are sensual time images constituted in the set of social conditions from which they arose, demanding that we traverse epochs in order to fully approach them, while knowing that they resist reconciliation. It is vitally necessary to perceive the gaps in and among them, which is to say, all that falls out of the frame as much as that which lays before us. The kitchen table, a formal device and central orienting force that structures the scenes in Weems' images, allows for a highly textured impression of what is at stake in the series as it relates to systems of modernity. Along with Weems, it is a recurring figure in the photographs. The table's symbolic significance is a direct reference to the structures that shape and reinforce the intersection of the concepts of race, gender, and class that are at the center of Weems' art. Further, beyond its function as a support mechanism for daily life on the one hand, the table can also be considered in the context of another of its meanings, as a systematically displayed series of facts. The table is a locus point in the piece. It is a kind of staging ground for Weems' characters to take up and counter the assemblage of anti-black, anti-female limitations the system circulates in actual life, as in representations of it. Weems's character, a meta-figure, tests the particular dispositions viewers bring to the encounter with her art. This slant suggests that we do not merely perceive the work, but that the work also perceives us. The images and text operate in a vector of mutual interpolation in the ways of our being of the world, and thus make known the vital questions of our orientation to them. This is strikingly illuminated in the positions of Weems and her interlocutors, or more precisely, how bodies inhabit space with others, marking the quest for organized collective life in the face of immense inequality in and alienation from the broader social sphere. In the face of such extreme antagonism, which gives rise to feelings of disorientation, we blatantly view the critical situation that is nowhere more severe than the United States, because it is wildly, unabashedly contrary to its founding ideals. In this process of engagement that is perceiving, or better even thinking, feeling the kitchen table series, disorientation swells the senses as the impossibility for certain beings, such as Black women, to align their bodies and normative space, something is somehow always out of reach, becomes glaringly apparent. Weems embraces this proposition through the different postures she takes while sitting at the table, fully fleshing out the open spaces in the frame with gestures that comport around the table's edges, or just out of its reach. There are moments when Weems clearly resists the ordering device that is the table, lying across it, leaning against a wall, and through serial images and a polyphonic voice, we come to see how the figure comes to know and feel herself, affirming or countering our impressions of her. It is worth considering the orientation of lines beyond the table's edge that cut through the visual plane. Weems is a master of geometric forms that proliferate in her work, most especially as circles or squares. Orbs abound, as seen in the mirror, glassware, the ashtray, the lighting fixture and its half-exposed bulb, the brim of a man's hat, and the birdcage. Our field of view is also honed as our eyes glance along and ultimately away from the straight, directional, hard lines of the chair, the door, the newspaper, the air vent, the pack of cigarettes, and the table, of course. Then there are the grids of photographs within Weems's images, such as those of Malcolm X, which directly point to the political context of Black social life. In such a strongly formal frame, thank you, the characters attain a remarkable amount of visual and conceptual levity as light impresses upon flesh. Already with her first substantial body of photographs, Family Pictures and Stories, 1978 to 1984, Weems demonstrates an interest in the social, political, and economic structure that contour Black subjective development and experience. In effect, in that series, she provides a subtle, multi-layered critique of the 1965 Moynihan Report, which she was aware of and which scholar Hortense Spillers analyzed as making the problematic claim that, quote, the Negro family has no father to speak. His name, his law, his symbolic function mark the impressive missing agencies in the essential life of the Black community. The report maintains, and it is surprisingly the fault of the daughter or the female line, end quote. Furthermore, Spillers poised a meaningful distinction between the flesh and the body in the typing of Black beings in the context of the social enterprise, which performs like an electric current, ideologically animating the work. Whereas, quote, before the body there is flesh, that 0 degree of social conceptualization that does not escape concealment under the brush of discourse or the reflexes of iconography. Even though the European hegemony stole bodies, some of them female, out of West African communities in the concert with African middlemen, we regard this human and social irreparability as high crimes against the flesh. If we think of flesh as a primary narrative, then we mean its seared, divided, ripped apartness, riveted to the ship's hull, fallen or escaped overboard, end quote. The flesh that Spillers calls into account also marks the foretaste for state-sanctioned violence against Black beings, which is perversely evident today in the ongoing extrajudicial killings of young Black men and women like Sandra Bland, as a relentless, continuous theft of the body, of life. So I insist upon the flesh in order to understand the ways in which such repetitive acts work. In reading Weems alongside Spillers' thought, it is Weems's insistence on the flesh, for flesh, unlike the body, follows its passion, claims its voice. Flesh is on the front lines of the everyday minutiae of life. It indicates that the inside has no cover, but rather is ever laid bare. Flesh marks the historical hijacking of gender as well, since the dehumanizing force of quantification made beings neither female nor male, but rather reduced them to things, a truth Weems directly confronts. Through quotidian acts around and on the table, Weems points to the ways, in Spiller's words, that, quote, gendering takes place within the confines of the domestic. Domesticity appears to gain its power by way of a common origin of cultural fictions, end quote. Like Weems' staging of the photo performances, the captive female body locates precisely a moment of converging political and social vectors that mark the flesh. It readily offers itself for consideration in Weems' art as an elaboration of the possibilities and pitfalls of representations of black females in which the intersectionality of race and gender is concerned. In the poses of Weems' character being consoled by friends, embracing her lover, and enjoying caresses, there is something about the sense of desire in her eyes that acts as a counterpoint to the hunt for black flesh. The way in which her mouth taut, a single eyebrow raised, head slightly turned, hand held close to her mouth or on the tip of her chin, that enacts being in the flesh, present before our very eyes, a, quote, full-grown woman for sure, end quote. Weems, desiring freedom while poised in the face of a troubling historical ground, beckons the viewer with the question, can you see me? Which is not a matter of faculty, but one of recognition. As scholar James Elkins reminds us, we see that which we always already know. The very act of seeing, of looking, becomes searching. Everything that the eye sees has some momentary interest or value, reminds one of your own life, and has some connection to our desires and actions. Weems impels us with the most basic question, and one that elements fundamental issues concerning American society and culture and black women's role in it. What have you brought with you in terms of your understanding of my position in the world as you search these images and text? With this query suspended before us, Weems wagers to put us into the reach of intimate encounters, catches of emotional resonance possible in quotidian acts of care and bonding, affection and disappointment. The kitchen table, the living room, the garden, the house are all cartographs that always lead to questions of position and relation, feelings of security and precariousness, and formations of the collective and the individual. Weems asks that we turn towards the constructs of race and gender through visual and verbal correlations to reflect on how we are individually implicated in them, functioning like a kind of interpretive self-reflexive relay. Our attention to the image and text and Weems' creation of them acts as a mutually constituted artistic ethical economy. The work is more than its single profile that is made available at any given moment. Most poignantly, it raises the specters of absence and non-presence, of the power of lovingly withholding phantoms in the gaps. As a kind of multivalent, single-dimension piece, the Kitchen Table series is never wholly available to us, and thus must be intended, anticipated, expected, presumed. With the ghost, it never directly presents, but has always already summoned at the conceptual level. It is only totally complete when we conjure these aspects. The background both is and is not in view. It is this unseen that is nevertheless there. This sensibility would later proliferate in Weems' art, namely in the Museum series of 2006, the Beacon series of 2005, the Louisiana Project of 2003, and Dreaming in Cuba in 2001, to name a few. Intertwining histories of arrival, the flesh besets us in the field of view of Weems' archaeology of concepts, images, and words. And as they coincide, the disorienting timing of their encounter, an arrival not given, an arrival in and of its own time, an arrival long activated, shapes that's what appears, and in its longue durée is the transformation of time and flesh into form, or what we call art. Thank you.
So now we're going to chat. Thank you so much. You know, it was very important to me to work with younger artists like Adrienne
and Sarah, because the work was made so long ago. And it was very important to have a sense of how the work was impacting, being felt, understood, theorized, embraced, or disregarded by another generation of women. So thank you very much for your analysis, for your thinking, for your probing, and for the questions I think that you ask of the work. It's engaging, and it leaves a lot. It leaves a lot actually for me to contend with, right? Because as an artist, as an artist, you think differently. You are an art historian, a curator, so you're thinking about work from a very particular kind of vantage point. And I'm a maker, interested in theory, but I'm not a theoretician, right? Just a sister trying to get it done, And so it has its own weight. It carries its own effort. But I'm deeply, deeply grateful to art historians and to you for your probing insight and for the levels of invention that you bring to the contemporary discourse on art making.
Thank you, Carrie, but I would just say that's only possible because it's in direct response to what you've created, right? I think that you can only, as a thinker, as a critic, as a curator, one is in a mode of responding. Very few would probably say that, but it's actually really true. Mm-hmm. And so I can only frame and put out what what my signaling device has picked up.
Yes.
So thank you for creating something that consistently, unending, that one can really sink one's mind into. And what is it like for you, Carrie, to have... How did this book come about 25 years on after the work was created? Why now?
Yeah. Well, I made this work so long ago. It's great to see you. Wonderful to see Baraka and see some of my friends in the audience. It's just so... really warms my heart. And you might have to forgive me because I might cry. I might cry, so get your tissues ready. How many of you are artists? Can I just see a show of hands of artists? So many of you in the audience are artists, struggling with your own ideas, struggling with your own ability to make or not make, questioning what you're doing and how you're doing it, wondering whether or not it will ever really be what you feel and want it to be, wondering whether or not you'll be able to bend those materials to your will, to your need, to your want, to your desire. It's really the hardest thing that we do. Is to make, is to create, and then to figure out sort of, not because you're desperately trying, but because it happens if you're working every day that you sort of encounter aspects of invention. And so the kitchen table project has been around for a very long time, and I worked on it very, very hard for a period of time. And it's been shown in many, 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 many ways, many ways over the years. It's been published in bits and pieces here and there. Sometimes it's been, published in other contexts. And then I knew a long time ago that it really deserved to be its own book. And that because it was a project that was bigger than I, it was bigger than me. It was playing in another field. That was allowing for other artists to develop a mode of work. That's when you know that your shit is bigger than you, right? When other artists are taking it to use it as a launch pad for their own inventiveness, for their own work, for their own purpose. I mean, it's been very interesting. Men and women, black and white, and in between. So I knew that it really needed to be its own book, and I was just starting to really think about it. And then one day, magic happened. And this extraordinary designer, Takaki Matsumoto, who is here sitting in the back, said, "Carrie, I think the kitchen table should be a book. And I think I should design it." And so it was with his extraordinary vision, his understanding of what the book was, how it needed to be designed, how it needed to be considered and made, that has made all of the difference. And I can't begin to thank you enough, Takaki. And I would just like it if you would stand just for a second so people can just see you. Please, 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 please. Thank you so much. And along with him, of course, working with Takaki was his extraordinary assistant, Amy Wilkins, who also worked with us tirelessly to get this book done. And so, Amy, thank you very much. And Amy is sitting right back there, too. And she's going to stand just quick, so that people can see you, because it's important. It's important. I think of this book as being really transformative in what it does, and it's not because I'm really thinking so much about me as artist. I'm simply thinking about what the work has done and how it's been used so consistently over the last 27 years it was made. And Adrienne asked me how the book came about. The book came about and how the series came about. And probably, like a lot of you, younger artists and even older artists, artists that are really sort of struggling to get at the meaning of things. I was teaching in New England, a very strange town, and working with lots of students, young people who were really desperately trying to figure out how to image themselves, raising all kinds of questions. Laura Mulvey's incredible book had come out. There are all these notions about the gaze and how one looks and how one should look, and the objectification of women, and all of those things were going on. But within that, I didn't really hear a sort of theorizing of space for black women. That wasn't there. That wasn't in any of the feminist literature that I was reading at the time. And so I knew I needed to insert myself, that I needed to be my own fabricator, my own representer, building the kinds of images that I wanted to see in the world, that probed and asked certain kinds of questions. And so I just started working on it like a little slave. I just worked on it every single day for a very long time.
And was the table there from the start?
The table was there from the start. It's just in my kitchen. It was just in my kitchen.
Yeah.
And I had made, the thing that's interesting to me about work, again, for you younger artists, is realizing that the key to the work that you will do lies in the work that you've already made. And that if you probe the work, if you're paying attention to your work, if you're paying attention to your own archive, if you're paying attention to your own making, you will discover really the best of what it is that the next project needs to be. I had already then made several photographs, not around, at my kitchen table, using this particular light, and then I started looking at it. It was the first one was about a man, actually. And then I brought in a few other things, and then suddenly one day, sort of a light bulb went off. And I started using myself. And in part, I actually came to using my own skin really because I was the only person that I could get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I mean, it really wasn't sort of like intentional at the beginning. It was just like, okay, I know what to do. I can do it whenever I want to do it. I know how to use this camera. I'll just sort of figure it out, and we'll see what happens. And so, I sort of stumbled into this way of working. But I think, also there's something, the unconscious is also sort of working through you half the time. Half the time we don't know what we're working on. We're just trying to figure things out. And I know that I was, sort of in that sort of moment where I was really searching for the nature and the utterance and the sound, the shape of my own voice. of my own voice. What was that? And I'd spent a long time working, and I'd spent a long time crying. I get up every morning very, very early, and I would cry myself to my desk. And then I'd get to my desk and I'd work for a couple of hours. And then I'd cry myself to school. And I'd work with my students, until, maybe 6 or 7 o'clock at night. And I would drive home and I would cry myself home. And I would cry myself, back into my studio, right? And this went on for a very, very long time. Very long time. Really, really just trying to dig at who is this woman? And who is she in relationship to all other things? What is her voice? What does it sound like? What is it really, right? Not what it's supposed to be in terms of academia or in terms of expectations, right? But what is it authentically that belongs to me? And one morning, I got up and a girlfriend, my best friend, called me on the phone. And I answered the phone, and I answered the phone with such a voice, with a voice that I had never heard coming through me. And I was so stunned by the sound that I put the phone down and I walked around my room looking for my mother.
Wow.
Looking for my mother. It was like I had made this huge journey only to come back home. And to know that the thing that was most authentic about my voice was where I came from, what it was rooted in, right? That it's, I come from a certain kind of tradition, and it has a certain sound and a certain expressive utterance, and that it was important to realize, it was important to grab hold to, and I think I probably didn't cry again, until, years later when a boyfriend broke my heart. But that's how it actually got made, and that's how the text came about, was through that resolve. It was sort of like this amazing journey, of coming through the slaughter. And then somehow I was out on the other end after a very long time of digging and working and digging and working and digging and working and asking myself lots of questions and listening to the music that I love the most. Music that, sort of heals the heart and helps you through the journey. So that's how Kitchen Table has come into being. It's been an extraordinary journey.
When did you realize that this was really something, as an artist, that this body of work, that you'd really done it? Because in hindsight, it is, am I wrong here? Like, major seminal piece, not only your career, of this period in time. It transcends time. But when did you realize that yes.
I didn't realize that for a long time. I realized that I had made something significant immediately. We're sort of in a different period, the way in which we deal with materials, right? We're dealing with digital, but I was a printer, so I would, and I used like an old Rolly. It has 12 photographs. Right? So I would shoot like a roll or two of film, and then I'd go to my darkroom and I'd process it and I'd wait for it to dry, and then I'd print it and I'd look at it, and then I'd come home and I'd shoot it again because I'd made a mistake. And it's like sort of that, like really working with material. And then one day, like the image just when it emerged out of the chemistry, when it emerged out of the developer, I ran out of my darkroom.
Wow.
I ran out of the dark room. I thought, right? I need to get somebody. I need to get somebody, because this is kind of deep, right? And it was just this really wonderful moment. I knew that something very important was happening. I didn't know what shape it would take or what it might mean 30 years later, because you never think of that. You can't as artists. But I knew that there was something that was significant, and I knew that it was an image that I had never seen before, that I had felt before, but I had never seen before. that it was the beginning of for me, it was the beginning of a way of working at a kind of resolve, but it was also that, yes, you've just made something new for your time, for your historical moment. This is something new and something that's different. But I didn't understand the extent to which it would be embraced.
So you do this. I mean, I see a through line in this work all the way through to work that you've made most recently, which is why I have that moment in the text of this geometric obsession with lines and squares and orbs. And what are you working on now? Where is Carrie Mae going now?
You know, Roy DeCarava, who was one of my favorite photographers, and whom I worked with very early in my career, said that, you know, Carrie, in order to work with people, you have to really care about them. You know, not like them, but you really have to care about them. You have to care about what happens. And DeCarava was also a very important inventor. I mean, he made like extraordinary photographs that nobody else has been able to like make again. There's only one. It's sort of amazing that your DNA, that who you are, that how you see the world is that singular, right? And so, I mean, you know, a lot of my life, a lot of my work has been organizing things around other artists. I really, even when I don't like the artists, right? Even when I don't like them, I respect them, and I respect what they're doing, and I respect the field that we are in together, and I'm interested in figuring out dynamic ways to broaden the field, to broaden the platform, to create spaces for dialogue and massive conversation. So whether it's like doing something at the Guggenheim, you know, where I brought together, you know, 150, 180 artists, musicians, composers, directors, to talk about contemporary practice, or I'm working with, I'm developing concert series, or doing performance. I mean, they're all deeply linked in the same thing. It has to do with my deep and abiding care for where we are as a people and how best to dig at this thing that is so vital to our humanity. And for me, I think the thing that is most vital to our humanity is grace. It's grace. It's grace. And so over the last year and a half, I've been really working around notions of democracy and grace in a very specific way. I think all of my work in one way or another is about that. But so I've been working with this, and I'm doing performance. I've just finished a performance that happened at Spoleto. And again, there again, I brought together a kind of a wonderful group of artists and singers, unlike, you know, what normally happens. So I brought, you know, Alicia Moran, who was an opera singer, Amani Azuri, who was a blues jazz, you know, virtuosic singer, Issa Davis, who was sort of a modern singer, right? And together, what they do, how they formulate sound, is just incredible, right? And then I worked along with your really wonderful orchestra, 18-piece orchestra, and a jazz band, bringing those two traditions together, and Carl Hancock Rux and Aja Monet as poets, and you know, and then a brilliant dancer. So I'm bringing together these sort of, you know, aspects of performance, and so that's been sort of wonderful. It's called Grace Notes, Reflections for Now, and it's going to be shown at Yale, presented at Yale again in the fall, in September, and then I think it's traveling around a bit. So that's actually what I'm working on now, and trying to go home to my husband before he puts all my stuff out on the curb. Because if I don't go home, he's going to put all my shit on the curb.
I doubt that.
He's going to say, just keep on going. Keep on going.
Carrie, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so
And
much.
thank you all for coming tonight.
We have time for a few questions, 1 or 2 or 3. So if you have questions, just raise your hand. I'll bring you the microphone.
Or comments, too.
Comments as well. Start here.
Hi. I have a question regarding your kitchen table about. So you mentioned how part of creating it was really discovering who you were, and you found your roots in your mother's voice and coming home. Do you think that that's what happened when you made the kitchen table the focus of what you did and how it incorporated how you lived in your roots?
Yes. Yes. It's. I had started the kitchen table series really before, but I think probably in some sort of unconscious way, yes. But I think there's something else that again, many of you are younger artists and still trying to figure out a way forward. One of the tragedies, I think, about sort of contemporary work is that everybody thinks that it needs to be like really super pristine and sort of sanitized, and that it has to be made in a studio, or you have to have like, $10,000 worth of lights, and it has to be like all HD or 5X or 5K in order for it to be right. And I'm very much interested in the economy of means. Like, how do you just get into your studio and make the most authentic work that you can make with the simplest materials available, so that you don't get lost in all of this mess that everybody really wants you to get lost in because it gives them a job, right? So you're working with a lighting designer, and he's got all this complicated nonsense going on that has nothing to do with your work. And then there's, there are all these people that are doing things that have nothing to do with your work. And so Kitchen Table was made with a light bulb. It was made with a light bulb, right? And some sort of, atmospheric light, that was about, 6 feet away. It's like, okay, how do I bend this to my need? Right? And so it was freeing because I could go there anytime. I was there anytime, right? In the morning, in the afternoon, and you could just use it. So these, and they're very, very, very simple devices. So on the one hand, you have something like the Kitchen Table series. On the other hand, you have something like Crewdson's work, who I adore. But men tend to really love machinery. Do you know what I mean? They like a whole bunch of shit that you really don't need. And more often than not, and it's very interesting, more often than not, and I think that this is very interesting in terms of the way that men and women work, more often than not, women are alone and working in their studios. Usually by themselves, sometimes with one assistant. But usually they're working by themselves. Cindy Sherman has, for many years, worked by herself. She's got her little closet full of things, right? And this sort of system of photography that but it's all very simple and it's all very immediate. And I think that that's a really interesting way in which we use material, we use home, we use studio in a very unique way that I think really needs to be understood, talked about more, and embraced.
Hi, thank you for being here. I wanted to ask, because you so often mention that you spend a lot of time with other artists' work, you spend a lot of time in dialogue with artists past and present.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious how you're able to maintain your voice within that conversation. Like, how do you sharpen your voice, and do you ever feel sometimes in engaging with that work that maybe you're being influenced in a way that you might not necessarily want to be?
Well, that's an interesting question. Of course, we're all influenced to some degree or another, to one degree or another. We are influenced, and I'm very anxious and interested in influence. And there have been actually some very interesting books written on the nature of influence. In fact, one very beautiful book is the book of Robert Frank and another great photographer. And but it's called the nature of influence, on influence. But it's a really beautiful book. No, I don't really worry about whether or not I'm going to lose my voice in relationship to anybody else's. That's really not my concern. And in a way, I think it sort of gets down to the thing that I think most about who you are. Who you are has to do with maintaining the core of yourself, maintaining the core of your dignity and the core of your ideas and the core and the essence of yourself in face of all things, come what may, right? That is your individuality, that is your grace, that is your humility, your ability to stand for self, even as you absorb and take in and relish the ideas of others. And so the thing that's interesting to me also about influence is that often, certainly for some of us, we gravitate towards artists who express something that we cannot express, right? I love Toni Morrison because Toni Morrison can say things in a way that I could never say them, but I've always felt them. Right? And so when I read what my feelings through her voice, I'm only grateful. Right? And so I think that, what influence does is simply broaden your palette. It teaches you how to be more authentically yourself.
Last question up here.
It's actually a comment. I wanted to thank you, Ms. Weems, for your body of work. I was introduced to you at your retrospective at the Guggenheim, and I was just blown away. I used to consider myself to be a singer and a songwriter, and after coming in contact with your work, I now call myself a sonic conceptual artist because I no longer see myself as just one thing or that thing, and I just thank you for.
Wow.
I thank you for that.
That's fantastic. Thank you. That's like a great compliment. Well, thank you all so much for coming.
Thanks, everyone.